Hello everyone, myself Dr. Pramod Kumar Poladi, working as Associate Professor and Associate Dean at School of CS and AI, SR University. In this video lecture, I am going to explain about conditional statements in Python. Before I go in depth about the conditional statements in Python, first I would like to give a brief on the control flow in programming. Generally, we take the help of a program or the programming language to develop the programs. Once any problem statement is given, to bring a solution for that problem statement, we write a program using any of the programming language. At the time of writing a program to bring a solution for that problem, we may have to analyze that problem thoroughly. After thorough analysis, if there is no condition involved in the process of bringing a solution, there we write certain statements. All those statements can be executed sequentially. Such a kind of program flow we call as a sequential or linear program flow. For example, I am giving you a task where you have to write a program to add 3 integer numbers. In that case, you will be reading 3 integer numbers one by one from the keyboard, and then you will be adding all the 3 integer numbers. Then that final sum you will be printing onto your screen. So this is the sequential process where there is no condition is involved. So such a kind of program development we call as a sequential program development. But in all the situations, this is not possible. There can be situations where certain constraints or conditions may be involved. When any certain conditions or constraints are involved, definitely the flow of a program execution may vary. In such kind of situations, we have to go with special statements. Those special statements we call as a conditional statements. Right? For example, I'm asking you to write a program where you have to say whether the given number is positive number or not. In that case, first you have to read a number, then you have to compare that number against 0. If that number is greater than 0, then you will be saying that the number is a positive number. Otherwise, you will be saying that the number is a negative number. So to decide whether the given number is positive or not, you are making use of a certain condition. So that condition must be written in a special statement. Such a statement we call as a conditional statement. Now we will be discussing about what are those conditional statements available in Python. Right. Then, before we actually get into a conditional statement, a small explanation on control flow in any programming language. In any programming language, the control flow can take place in different ways. The meaning of control flow is the way the program statement gets executed. In order to decide the program statement's execution, there must be a statement. Such a statement we call as a control statement. So in Python programming language, such control statements has been classified into 3 categories. The first category is conditional control statements category, and second one is transfer control statements category, and third one is iterative control statements category. Under the first category, we have 4 variants: simple if else, then nested if else. Under the second category, we have 3. They are break, continue, and pass. Under the third category, we have 2. One is for, other one is while. So these are the different kinds of flow control statements in Python. So in this lecture, we are going to specifically discuss about only conditional control statements. That means on if else ladder, and if else nested, we are going to have a discussion. Yes. Before we get into that, first I would like to clarify on what actually the conditional statement is and what its purpose and where do we use. Coming to its definition, that is what a conditional statement is: a statement that executes different actions based on whether a condition is true or false. What is the purpose of that conditional statement? The purpose of the conditional statement is to enable decision making and control the flow of program or control the flow of execution. Where, in which kind of applications, in which kind of situations we use that conditional statements. For example, while validating a user login, while grading the systems, or while selecting a particular menu, and while checking the user input. These are some of the day-to-day life examples where the conditional statements are used. For example, if I go with login validation, when you log into your Gmail account, there you will be giving your username and password. If both of them are correct, then only you are allowed to log in. But how it is going to be decided means internally at the back end, your credentials will be verified or validated, where a condition will be executed. Then similarly, while I am checking a grade of a student, I am giving 3 subjects marks, then I am asking the system to decide the grade of a student. So in order to decide a grade of a student, after finding a sum, that sum need to be compared against a particular grade threshold. If the threshold is 70 or above, then if the marks scored is 70 or above, then we say it is a distinction. If it is in between 60 to 70, we say it is a first class. If it is between 50 to 60, we say it is a second class. If it is just above 40, in between 40 to 50, then we say it as a third class. That is how actually the grading is going to be done. Here also certain constraints or conditions are involved. So these are the certain examples where actually the conditions or the constraints are involved. In certain kind of situations, while writing a program, we use a conditional statements. Right. What is control flow and what are control flow statements? These are fundamental components of programming languages that allow developers to control the order in which instructions are to be executed in a program. Actually, these control statements enable execution of block of code multiple times, execute a block of code based on conditions, and even to terminate or skip the execution of certain lines of code. So these are certain places where actually the control statements are going to be utilized while developing a program. Yes, coming to the first control statement. As I've told, there are 4 conditional statements. The first conditional statement is if statement, and the second conditional statement is if else, third is if else ladder, and fourth is nested if else. So now we will be discussing about one by one. So where about each conditional statement, I'll be explaining in a way like first I'll explain what actually it is, then what its syntax, and one example and a flow chart. Yes, coming to if statement. Basically, if statement is a one-way branching statement. Doesn't mean that it doesn't checks about the false case. If a condition is true, a particular block of code gets executed. If it is false, nothing will be done by this statement. In order to do such a kind of operation, here we have a syntax. Syntax means a rule. We have to follow certain rules and regulations while we are writing a program. Here the syntax is if followed by condition. If is a keyword that must be written in lowercase. Condition can be anything, that is a test expression. So beside if we are writing a condition that has a test expression immediately followed by a colon. That colon actually decides to create a block. So once you put a colon, after that, if you put it onto enter, then that is going to create one statement block. If a condition is true, this statement block gets executed. Either it can be a single statement or multiple statements. Right? We'll look into the flow chart where, so once the program is started, where the control goes to a expression. This is a test expression, which is there in a rhombus symbol that gets evaluated. After evaluating that expression, if the result is true, statement block gets executed. The statement block either may contain single statement or collection of statements. Once after completion of all these statements, the control goes to a stop. So the program will be terminated. Then coming to example here, I would like to test whether the 10 is greater than that of 5 or not. For that sake, I'm writing a program. If 10 greater than 5, so when such a statement is encountered to the interpreter where this condition will be evaluated, 10 greater than 5, result becomes true because it is a relational expression. The relational expression results true or false only. So here the result becomes true. And the control will jump into the body of a if block where it will be executed, where it is printing 10 greater than 5, followed by the next statement, which is outside to a if block. That is program ended. In this case, the result becomes 10 greater than 5, followed by program ended. For example, I will take one more. For example, if 10 greater than 50 is the statement, then of course 10 is not greater than 50. In that case, the true block cannot be executed. As there is no false block, directly the control goes to a last statement where print program ended. In case of 10 greater than 50, the result is just a program ended. This is all about if statement. Why I said it is one way means only we have a one possibility, that is true possibility. We are not looking into the false possibility. We are not considering the false possibility, right? Here is one more example. First, I'll go to the second example where age equals to some. Here I am reading the age means input is the dynamic statement. Dynamic input purpose, I am using a input statement. It reads the age of a person through a keyboard. Then that will be stored in age. Here I'm checking. If I read age as 19, then here will be condition 19 greater than or equals to 18. Of course, that is true. Then it prints the result as eligibility to vote. Then in the first example, there is a small mistake. The mistake is age equals to the input statement. After the input statement, I'm using if. Then after if I'm not putting the print statement inside a block of code, I'm not creating a block actually. So when there is no block, when there is no intended block is created, it leads to a error. Which error? Indentation error. So once you use a if statement after a column, once you hit on the enter button, you should ensure that there must be a proper indented block going to be created. If there is no indented block is going to be created, it leads to an error. Right. This is all about simple if control statement in Python. Next, shorthand. See, as I've told, in case of a if statement, that if block may contain either a single statement or collection of statements. If I have a collection of statements, of course, I can go with this block of code. But if I have a single statement, in such cases, instead of creating a block of code, that if statement as well as the statement attached to it, both can be written onto a same line. Such a process we call as a shorthand if statement writing process. Such a process we call as a shorthand if statement writing process. Right. Shorthand if statement is used when only one statement inside the if block. This statement can be mentioned on the same line which holds the if statement. So the syntax is if followed by condition, followed by column, followed by the statement. In the previous example, we have written that statement after the if condition, means we have created a separate block for it. But now I'm putting that statement onto the same line, itself. Hence, we call it as a shorthand if statement. For example, I initial value is 15. Now I would like to test whether that 15 is greater than that of 11 or not. So as I would like to go with only single statement in its block of code, I'm putting on a same line just beside the semicolon. If I greater than 11, column, and I greater than 11. So as this result is true, automatically it prints the result as a greater than 11. For example, if that 11 is 111, if I greater than 111, then what's the result? The result is nothing because I have not written any statement after that. Simply the program can be terminated. Here the point to be remembered is the shorthand if statement can be used when only we have a single statement inside the block of a if. If there are multiple, we go with a regular if block of code, right? Then next is if else. The drawback of if statement is that only has single option. that is true option. If something goes wrong, if something goes a false into false state, the normal or the simple if statement doesn't take care about it. But there is an alternative conditional statement where whose name is if else. It is even taking care about true case as well as false case. That's the reason why I say it is a two-way branching. Here we have two possibilities, two options, two choices, or two branches. So if-else statement is a statement where it is used when there are two options we have. When the condition is true, if block is executed, otherwise the else block is executed. Yes, here is a flowchart that will discuss. Here, expression. First, that expression we are evaluating. If the expression result is true, then which block will be executed? The if block will be executed. If its result becomes false, then the else block means else branch code gets executed. So here we have a specific blocks. True block is for in true case and false block is for false case, right? So if I want to do it, I have to create just two separate blocks. I have to attach one block of statement for the if and other block of statement with the else. Else block is for false and block is for if block is for true, right? Then if else statement. Example here. In this example, what I am doing is I am reading two numbers, number 1 and number 2 via keyboard. Here I am testing against. If number 1 is greater than number 2, I am going to subtract number 2 from number 1. If not, I am going to subtract number 1 from number 2. So here we have two possibilities. Either subtracting number 1 from number 2 or number 2 from number 1. So as we have two options here, I am implementing a if-else statement here. Right? These are some of the examples wherein we can implement if-else. Next one is shorthand if-else statement. Similar to shorthand if statement, even we can have a shorthand if-else statement also. When you have only single line of code with the if-else that you can place on a single line. Right. Here's an example where A initial value is 3 and B initial value is 5. So I would like to check whether A value is greater or B value is greater. But both of them I would like to put onto a same line. So first I'm checking if A greater than B, then A will be printed onto a screen. Otherwise, B will be printed onto a screen. So on a same line, I'm putting everything. Then next one. So even the single line if statement can be used with three conditions also. Earlier I have used it only with two conditions. Now I am going with three conditions. If A value is greater than B, A is greater. Else, if if A is same as B, then A and B are equal. Otherwise, B is greater. Here I have three conditions. Either A may be greater than B, or A may be equals to B, or A may be less than B. All the three can be written on the same line. So such a kind of statements we call as a shorthand if-else statements. Then next one is nested. The general meaning of nested is writing one if statement inside another if statement. Not only writing if in if, even we can write if else inside either if or inside else, or some cases we can write it in both. Once again, I repeat it. Nested means writing if inside if, or writing if else inside either if or else or in both. So there are many possibilities here. So we may be looking into one or two possibilities here. Right. So nested if statement means if statement can also be placed inside other if statement. This conditional statement is called as a nested if statement. Here is a control flow or the flow chart where first I'm testing a condition 1. So if this condition is true, I'll be getting into a inner one where I'm checking inner condition. If it is also true, its corresponding block gets executed. After that, the control goes to the next statement, if any, outside. If the second condition is false, then the false block of code gets executed, followed by the control flow moved on to the next line. If the very first condition itself is false, then I may be going into else block, wherein I'm taking one more. That's the reason I have told you, this is like a if else, wherein in if we have a if else again. Else also we have a if else again. So this is the best case to explain. In a if I have a if else, in a else also I have a if else, right? Then two examples. We'll discuss about two examples. In the first example, I would like to check whether a particular person is eligible to cast his vote or not. So the person's age I'm considering as 20. So at the outer, if I'm taking is age. If age is greater than or equal to 18, I say eligible to vote. Of course, the age of a considered person is 20. 20 is greater than or equals to 18. Inside the outer, I have one more. The same age I'm checking again is 21. Not only checking about is eligibility to vote, even I would like to check whether that particular person is eligible to apply for driving license or not. So once the age is 20, he is eligible to vote. Then age is greater than or equal to 21. As this becomes false, he is not eligible to uh, apply for driving license. So that it simply says not eligible for driving license. So here, in this case, it prints eligible to vote, not eligible for driving license. For example, if I enter age of a person is 16, then at the outer level itself, it will be failed. 16 greater than or equal to 18. The condition becomes false. Directly it goes to else, where it means not eligible to vote. Then the second example, here I would like to check whether the number is positive or negative. For that case, I am considering input as 8. Yes, 8 is greater than or equal to 0. Then the condition is true. Then the same 8 is equals to 0? No. In that case, simply it means the number is positive number. For example, if I take number as 0, then 0 greater than or equal to 0. True. Then 0 equals 0. True. In that case, simply it prints 0. If I take minus 8 is greater than or equal to 0, false. Directly I'll go to a outer else block where I print negative number. So this is how actually the nested control statement gets executed. Yes, one more is conditional statement, that is if else. Generally this we call as a ladder if else. Means continuously we define conditions. One after another, those conditions gets evaluated, right? So in a ladder way, in a chain way. Okay. The if else if statement is a shortcut of if else chain. Instead of writing if else in a chain manner, we write them in a ladder manner. Right. Here is a flow chart. First, I am taking condition 1. If this condition result is true, this particular statement block gets executed, followed by next statement, if any. Otherwise, program gets terminated. If the test condition 1 becomes false, then I go to a test condition 2. If it is true, its corresponding block will be executed, followed by next statements, if any, and so on. If any particular condition is met, its corresponding block of code gets executed. Otherwise, it's move on to the next one till there is no condition is satisfied. If there is no condition is satisfied, then ultimately there is a last block. That block we call as a else block that will be executed. So here you can see syntax: if condition, else if condition, and maybe else if condition. If no condition is satisfied, finally we'll land at this block where those statements gets executed. It can be a single statement or multiple statements. We'll look into an example. Here's an example where I'm reading a number from the user that I would like to check against whether it is positive or negative or 0. We have a multiple options to be checked. That's the reason why I'm going with multi-option if else. That is ladder if else. So if I read number as 4, positive number 4, number greater than 0, course true. It prints number is positive, followed by program termination. In the next instance, I would like to take the input as -4. Then in the first case, -4 is greater than 0. That is false. I will be moving on to else if where -4 is less than 0. That is true. Where the number is negative gets printed on the screen. In the third instance, giving input as 0. Then the first condition, 0 greater than 0, of course, false. It will move on to a else if. 0 less than 0, of course, false. Then by default, I will be moving on to a last else, where it depends number is 0. This is how actually the ladder gets executed. Yeah, this is nested if statement and else if. So the meaning of this is we can write if in if as well, else if in if. If you look at this example, here I have written if inside if. The if amount greater than 1000 is the inner if. If amount greater than 200 is the outer if. But inside the inner if, again I have used else if, that is ladder. That is also possible. We can place if in if, and we can place ladder else if in else or if, right? That is how we can manage. So it depends on a complexity of a problem statement. We can go on adding the nestings. To understand more about the discussed topics, please you work on these practice problems. The first practice problem is a number is entered by the user. That number has to be checked against whether it is multiples of 5 or not. Then only we have to print that number. So print multiple of 5 only if the number is divisible by 5. So let us take 50 is the number I'm supplying through a keyboard, where you are supposed to use if control statement to test it against. If 50 modulo division 5, obviously that is true. Then we say that is multiples of 5. Then the number is divisible by 5. One more example. If I give 42 as an input, then I write a code if 42 mod 5 colon print divisible by 5. But in this case, nothing will be printed because 42 is not divisible by 5. So in order to work on first problem statement, just use only simple if, right? Then coming to the second example, a person is eligible for a senior citizen discount if age of that person is 60 or above. For that, write a program to check his eligibility. So here he may eligible or not. So as it is true false case, then we will be going with if else. In this case, you have to read person's age via keyboard. After reading his age, you have to compare that age with 60. Doesn't mean that age is greater than or equals to 60. If the person's age is equals 60 or above 60, then he is eligible to get a discount which is offered by a bank, right? Then coming to the third example, write a Python program to classify a number as whether it is positive number or negative number or 0. In this case, we have to go with ladder. So first read a number, compare that against 0. If it is greater than 0, say it is a positive. Else if compare it with less than 0. If that is true, print it is a negative. If both of them are not satisfied, then finally the else block will be the resultant block, where else the number is 0. Then the fourth one is it is to calculate the electricity bill as per the constraints. So in this case, the input is number of units consumed by the user. If a user has consumed less than or equals to 50 units for that particular month, per unit, the charge is 2 rupees. Then if the consumed number of units exceeds 50 and below 100, then the charge per unit is 3 rupees. Then if the number of units consumed by the customer greater than 100, then Per unit, the charge applicable is 5 rupees. For that, you need to develop a program using a Python programming language. Here, I'll take one example. If the number of units consumed by a customer is 52, then it is not 52 into 3 straight away. Up to 50, the charge is 2 rupees per unit. Above 50, we have 2 units now. For those 2 units, 3 rupees per unit. That is 6 rupees. Put together, 106 rupees. That is how you are supposed to calculate. One more example I'll take. If the number of units is 105, then for first 50 units, 50 into 2, that is 100 rupees. For the second 50 units, 50 into 3, that is 150. 150 plus previous 100, 250. And for above 5 units, which are above 100, 5 rupees each, that is 25. So 100 plus 150, 250 plus 25, 275 is the charge. This is how you are supposed to calculate. Coming to fifth one, this is to print a grade of a student. A student passes if marks greater than or equals to 40. If marks are greater than or equal to 75, the student gets distinction. So here you have to use a ladder. If marks scored by a student above 75, distinction. Then 75 to 60, first class. Then below 60 to 50, second class. And below 50 to 40, that is just to pass, that is third class. Below 40, that is fail. So for this case, you have to write a program. And last assignment or the practice problem is, if user enters his username and password, we need to validate whether the user is valid user or not. Here the username and password both must be checked against. Earlier in all the examples, we have dealt with numbers. In this case, we have to deal with the strings. Username is a string and password is also a string. So first username as a string has to be compared against a actual username, and the password has to be compared against the preserved password. If both of them are true, then the login is successful. Then he can do some calculations. Thank you.